We've just looked at the individual winners and losers of surprise inflation, but let's look at the overall impact that inflation has on an economy. So these are the costs of inflation, the impact it has. And the first cost of inflation is that it increases income inequality. And that's because if you're working, then when there's inflation, you negotiate a higher wage, right? A cost of living adjustment. So maybe you've heard of a COLA, a cost of living adjustment. This is to recognize the fact that as a worker, it is now costing you more for shelter, for food, and so we need to give you a raise to accommodate for that. So it's because of inflation, you're getting higher pay. So if you're working, you get that adjustment, so it makes that inflation not as bad. But what if you're not working? Well, if you're not working and you're living off your retirement, for example, then you're living off of the money you've set aside, and that money no longer buys what it bought before. So we create a bigger disparity between the rich and the poor. The second cost of inflation is the impact it has on our balance of trade. So we have to look at exports and we have to look at imports. Which one of those is our goods? Okay, so exports, remember that's the money coming in, and that's the goods we made going out. Imports is money going out, and it's buying goods from other countries. So let's suppose that in Canada, we are seeing inflation. So the price of our goods are going up. Well, if the price of our goods that we made are now more expensive, do foreigners, so our exports, do they want to buy them? No, they're more expensive now, so that means that they're going to buy less. Our exports are going to go down. And as Canadians, we don't live that far away from the US, so if things are now more expensive in Canada, those of us who live next to the border might drive across the US and buy our stuff there. Or you might order things online from the US, in which case we're going to import more from another country because their goods are cheaper when our goods become more expensive. So inflation can impact your balance of trade. It makes exports go down and imports go up. And since GDP is C plus I plus G plus X minus IM, it can have an impact on your economy because the exports are going down and the imports are going up, which means it can make GDP go down. The third cost of inflation is what we call shoe leather cost. The idea behind this is if there's inflation, then you constantly need more money to buy those basic things you buy every day. So let's suppose that you normally buy lunch for $10. Now lunch is $20. Next day lunch is $30. We're seeing hyperinflation. Well, that means you got to constantly go and get more money to be able to buy the same stuff you've been buying before. Well, back before we had debit cards and credit cards, that would mean another trip to the bank to pull out more cash, right? So you're wearing out the leather of your shoes, constantly going to get more cash. Well, how often do you go to the bank now? We're not really wearing out our shoes to go get more money, so we have to consider what is the opportunity cost. That is, what is the value of the next best alternative? The idea here is that if I have to work extra hours to make extra money so I can buy the same things I bought last week, then that means I'm giving up other stuff. I'm giving up time with my family, I'm giving out time working out. There's an opportunity cost, a sacrifice I'm making. There's also an opportunity cost to the money. Because now, if instead of spending $10 for lunch, I have to spend $20 for lunch, that means that there's now $10 extra I can't use on something else. And so I'm giving up buying, enjoying, eating other things. So there's an opportunity cost. We call this the shoe leather cost. The fourth cost of inflation is what is called menu cost. The idea here is that if I have a store, maybe I have a grocery store, for example, and there's inflation. Well, if there's inflation, I need to change the signage for everything in my grocery store. Because I'm now paying more to bring it in, I need to sell it for more. So now I have to pay my workers to go and change all the signs in the store. Well, if you're experiencing hyperinflation, for example, those prices might be changing multiple times during a day. And that's very costly for both your business and the economy if now we're having to spend all our time and resources changing all the signs to reflect all the price changes. The fifth cost of inflation is the impact that inflation can have on investment spending. Okay, so who does investment spending? Remember, investment spending is businesses buying from other businesses. Now, we talked before about how if there's surprise inflation, businesses benefit, right? Because they can charge more for their good before all of their costs go up because wages are sticky. But it has an impact on businesses when there's inflation on investment spending. This is businesses buying, well, you tell me. What's included in investment spending? We have residential structures, non-residential structures, inventory, and capital goods. Well, whether businesses decide to expand and get another non-residential structure or expand their business and get more machinery or capital goods, it's going to be impacted by inflation. For example, let's suppose that prices go up. All right, we have inflation. Well, we said before that one of the losers when there's inflation are the creditors, the people who lent you money. So how do those creditors make sure that they're not worse off? Well, if they're starting to see inflation, then they make sure those interest rates are higher so they're not worse off. So prices go up, lenders charge more interest to make sure that the money they get back buys the same as the money they lent out. Well, if interest rates go up, do businesses expand? Are they going to take out a loan for that new location? Are they going to borrow money to buy a new machine? No, it's harder to get a loan. It costs more. And so investment spending is going to go down. Okay. The last cost of inflation is business cycles, the instability in the market. And we're going to look more at that in just a moment. So hold on to that one and we'll address business cycles, instability in the market in the next video. But as we're looking at the cost of inflation here, we said that whenever there is a price increase, it causes interest rates to increase. So let's look at that in a bit more detail. When we look at interest rates that you pay to borrow money, they are in nominal terms. We can break an interest rate down into two pieces: the real interest rate and the inflation rate. So the real interest rate is the compensation to the lender for being without the money. So you lend me, or I lend you $100 and I charge you interest. Well, I'm without that $100 for a week or two while you have it, which means I can't spend it. So I need some compensation for the fact that I can't spend my $100. That's the real interest rate. Then I need some compensation for the fact that when you give me back the $100, it doesn't buy what the $100 I gave you does, because prices have gone up. So we have to add in the anticipated inflation. So for example, right now, excuse me, the prime rate. So when you borrow money from the bank, you pay certain percentage plus or minus prime depending on your credit worthiness. The prime rate right now is 3.2%. Well, that 3.2% is part compensation for the bank being without their money and part anticipation of inflation. If we anticipate that inflation, let's say we anticipate 1% inflation, then how much is the real interest rate? How much is the bank making? So 3.2% is equal to the real interest rate plus our 1% inflation. So our real interest rate here is 2.2%. Now if we anticipate more inflation, so if the real interest rate is 2.2%, but now banks are anticipating more inflation, maybe 2%, what does that do to the nominal interest rate? Well, it goes up. Right now it would be 4.2%. So when we expect prices to increase when there's anticipated inflation, then we increase interest rates to make sure that those who are the lenders are adequately compensated. So the amount of money that you're paying them back will buy what the amount of money they gave you plus that adjustment to make sure that it's the same. Okay, so if we anticipate more inflation, interest rates go up. This is what is called the Fisher effect. The Fisher effect is that relationship between interest rates and inflation. The nominal interest rate is equal to the real interest rate plus anticipated inflation. We anticipate more inflation, then we get higher interest rates. So let's look at them. Here on this graph, you can see nominal interest rates in Canada, and you can see the inflation rate. So notice for the most part they're moving together. When we anticipate inflation, we raise interest rates. When we anticipate deflation, we lower interest rates. That is, except for in the 70s, where we got a bit caught off guard. Remember, this 1970s was a period of stagflation, high unemployment and high inflation, and so we weren't anticipating it, so the interest rates had not been adjusted accordingly. We can look at this information a different way. Here in blue, you see the nominal interest rate. Here in red, you see the real interest rate. And so the difference between them would be the level of inflation. So you can see the real and the nominal should move together as we anticipate inflation.